Jesse Ventura's Don't Start the Revolution Without Me. So this is obviously, we got Jesse Ventura's mug staring back at you, so pretty obvious who this is. Jesse Ventura published this in, I believe, 2008. And he's one of those guys that I'm really curious about. He's one of those I'd really love to figure out what the real scoop is on Mr. Ventura. You had a guy that went from being a Navy SEAL in the early days of the Buds program or whatever, and then moving to professional wrestling, and then to a career in government, to being briefly like kind of a talk show host, to living kind of in quasi-exile in Mexico, and then coming back and having a TV show for a little while. So he's been all over the place. And I first got this book in, I think this was published in 2008. It was either very late 2007 or early 2008. And I was very excited to see this because this was back when this came out, there weren't a lot of books or people talking like this, like he does in this. So that was kind of interesting in and of itself. So interesting stuff in this book that might interest some of you is he mentions in here that in his tenure as governor of Minnesota, one of the interesting things that happened was he said on his first week or month or so in office that he was taken down into the basement of the Capitol building for a meeting with some like CIA operatives that were working within his state government. And that was probably the biggest bombshell in this book, is that he says that from that moment on, he was aware that the CIA was actively working within his state government covertly, and he's assumed, if I remember right, that was probably the case with most state governments. So there's some really interesting facts like that really make you wonder about what is happening and what is the actual mechanisms of power within state and even local municipal governments. So there's some interesting things there. Again, he's one of those guys that's kind of an enigma to me because it's hard to tell if he's really leading the pack or if he's kind of following where he sees the subculture going. And you see that a lot with the late Jim Marrs was like that, where Jim Marrs would come out with some stuff that really sounded groundbreaking, but what he was really doing is just kind of riding the current. So he was never the first guy to say it. He was the guy that would take what other people said and reassemble it into something that sounded like his own material. And not in a weird copyright infringement way, but just like he would let somebody else, once the information was out there, he would kind of grab the stuff that was out there and assemble it into something that packaged in his own form. So Jesse Ventura kind of has that same vibe to him of a guy that is not necessarily the first guy on the block to say something revolutionary, but he's the guy that's watching where the trends are and hopping in line with those trends, good or bad, whatever. So, and I'm always a little bit wary when I see that kind of approach, because you never know really where some of these guys stand, if that's really what their core belief is, or if they're just taking that position because that is a politically advantageous position to take at that moment in time. So anyway, very interesting stuff. If you didn't pay a whole lot of attention to Jesse Ventura during the early 2000s, this is worth a read just to see what happened with his. He briefly had a talk show or a TV show. And because of some of his opinions, and again, this is according to Mr. Ventura, obviously, but according to some of his opinions that ran counter to the establishment, that cost him his job, but they still had to pay off his contract. But part of that required that he lay low and not speak out until this contract was paid off. So that's why he went to Mexico and all that. So he tells all that story in here, and it is a fascinating story. But any of you who've read this, I'd be curious your opinion on it. overall, it was a fascinating book. But like I said, that's my one thing with Ventura is that kind of weird vibe you get of like, where's this guy really going with all this? For the record, I don't believe the story about that Chris Kyle made up about Jesse Ventura. I think was kind of a sad little grab at fame, but I think he's a trustworthy guy in that respect. I just don't know big picture thinking what exactly his motivations are. So anyway, Jesse Ventura, Don't Start the Revolution Without Me. Really, it was a fun, easy read, very interesting read, especially about his experience in state government. So there you go.